Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first in our export skills program workshops for this series. And of course, you've joined the module, which is all about advanced e-commerce. I'm Collins Rex. I'm a director with the Global Trade Professionals Alliance, and the Global Trade Professionals Alliance is an organization that cultivates international standards within the industry. Our aim is to create a trade environment that is both inclusive and trusted by all. GTBA has partnered with Global Victoria and also Agriculture Victoria for some of the sessions to deliver the comprehensive export skills program. And of course, if you want details of the rest of the program, and it is pretty comprehensive, feel free to visit the HTTPS URL that you see on your screen now. Just a disclaimer, and I draw your attention to the screen. Anything that you hear here is of a general nature. It's not to be construed as specifically targeted business advice. So please make sure that you check your own circumstances first. And bear in mind as well that this webinar is being recorded. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, which for me, based where I am, is the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I also extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are joining us online today. So let's get right into it, shall we? Because we've got quite a bit to cover. And while we're doing this, I'm going to turn off my camera so that you can concentrate on what you see on the screen. So today's session is all about recapping and really encapsulating e-commerce in a nutshell, really. And it's in advance of the sessions that will be following, which of course will be drilling down into a lot more advanced detail about e-commerce. And as I was looking through the registration list today, I see quite a few familiar faces and names for those of you that have attended previous sessions. So welcome back. And if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. And I look forward to seeing you online for the remainder of these sessions. Now, just it might seem a bit of a no-brainer, but it really is important to point out that cross-border e-commerce, in other words, e-commerce that you conduct internationally, is exporting, and trading online is business. So today we're going to look at finding your e-commerce fit. We're also going to touch on selling directly versus selling indirectly, getting your goods to your customer, which of course is all important, and probably the most important of all, getting paid. So let's start off by looking at e-commerce in the broadest sense. So what exactly is e-commerce? Well, again, not a no-brainer. It is the activity of electronically buying or selling products through online services or over the internet. And you might think that e-commerce is something brand new, but that particular definition of e-commerce, in fact, dates all the way back to 1984. So really nothing new under the sun. Different types of e-commerce. Of course, there's international cross-border e-commerce, which is selling across international borders. It can be done through an online e-shop, through third-party sites, etc. It's exporting, but it's exporting through online channels. Omni-channel e-commerce is an approach in which multiple sales and or marketing channels are integrated to provide customers with a seamless and integrated shopping experience. And as this series progresses, we will be devoting an entire webinar to omni-channel, which is vitally important in today's environment. Headless e-commerce is an e-commerce architecture where the front end, in other words, the visible part of your website, is decoupled from the back end e-commerce functionality. And that means that you can update and edit the front end without affecting the back end. B2B e-commerce, just as it is in any other form of commerce, is business to business sales. In this case, of course, it is just done electronically. Selling online, absolutely just business. So important to remember that whether you are selling online or whether you are selling through more traditional channels, all the rules of doing business and all the rules of engaging with your customers still apply. Also, all the ways in which you select a market apply. Nothing new under the sun. Exporting online, still exporting, which means you need to know your obligations under the law of the country or the countries to which you're exporting. You need to understand that duties and tariffs can apply to your product. There might not be a minimum rule. It could apply from the first dollar, it could apply from the 500th or the 1,000th, but you need to understand. You need to be aware of any potential non-tariff barriers to entry, and you also need to have a strategy for dealing with them. And of course, when we're talking about non-tariff barriers, we're talking about anything that makes it more difficult for you to conduct business in a particular market with particular customers, and that is removed from the duties that a sale might attract. You also need to know what logistical issues you may face. For example, do you need an in-country warehousing operation in your target market? How difficult is it to get the goods into the hands of your customers, particularly that all-important last mile? And of course, when it comes to logistics, the last mile is just as important as the first. How do you overcome all of this? You do your homework. And that means you need to make an informed decision. Market research is absolutely critical to successful e-commerce. If you know what your market is about, you will know what motivates the buying decisions in that market. It will help you choose the market. It will help you choose the specific area of that market into which you want to sell the product or the service that you're going to offer into that market. It will help you to establish a pricing plan and, of course, a sales strategy. To be successful, and this applies throughout everything that we're going to be covering in this series, you need the right product sold at the right price in the right place using the most suitable means of promotion. So let's pause for a moment on product and service demand. You might have something which is really fabulous and it sells really well domestically within Australia, but is there a demand for it in your target market? And if there is a demand for that good or that service, how large is the potential market? And if it's a really large market, can you supply in sufficient quantities? Sometimes it's the very success that you chase that can in fact hamstring you. So how large is the market? Can you supply? You need to consider the culture of the market into which you are selling, and this applies equally whether you're selling B2B or B2C. You need to be comfortable that the culture fits your product in terms of things like religious beliefs, gender dominance, whether you have more men or women shopping online in a particular market, age-related beliefs, etc. If you were going to set up an operation in another country, you would do the research to understand all of this stuff. You still need to do that research when you are selling online. And of course, you need to understand the appropriate marketplaces. Do the freely available marketplaces suit the attributes of your product? And what we mean by that is quite simply, where you normally sell your product online, can you sell it through the same channels in your target market? Bearing in mind that not all marketplaces and platforms are available in every single country of the world. You need to understand which ones are and which ones are not. You also need to understand how you are going to distribute and promote your product. If you find that there are channels that you would traditionally use to promote your product and those channels are not available in your target market, so let's say, for example, you are a great user of Facebook to promote your product. Your target market might not be accessible to Facebook, or it might just not be particularly popular there. If you have to switch to a different channel, how are you going to do that? And are you in fact capable of doing so? And does that new channel suit your product or your brand? Also very important to understand the competition. Whether your competition is on the ground in the market, whether it is another exporter like yourself, but from somewhere else, whether it's a direct or a substitute, you need to understand what is the competition, what is their pricing strategy, how do they get into the hands of the customers, how do they perform in that market, and how does that relate to what it is that you are planning to sell there. Also very important to understand the government, and that of course means barriers to entry such as registration requirements, quotas, and any other regulations that might make it very difficult for you to trade in that market through e-commerce means. What are the market metrics? Literally, how big is the potential size of the market? What is the characteristic of that market? How do they buy? What do they buy? What does that market look like? And what are the demographics of the market? You need to get a really good sense of what your customer looks like. Also, market entry requirements. Even for e-commerce, some markets do collect duties, and they still have quotas that relate to the amount of a particular good that can enter that market. You need to understand what that is and how that could affect your business. There could also be government controls on imports. So you might not be able to sell your goods if they are considered restricted goods in that market, even if you are selling them B2C through e-commerce. Remember, your goods are still going to be clearing customs, and that means they will be inspected, even if you are sending to a single consumer. Also understand those all-important in-country logistics. So how are you going to move your goods around the country? Getting it to the border is one thing. Getting it from the border to your customer is an entirely different thing. Also bear in mind that if your customers are buying online from you, they very often want the same sort of service that they would get buying from a local supplier online. They need to understand where you are, and they need to understand that there may be a delay in you getting the goods into their hands. Also, you need to consider reverse logistics. How are you going to deal with returns from that market? Now, the e-commerce market is massive and it is growing exponentially. As you can see, if you look at the little graph on the screen right now and you compare 2020 to 2022, and you look at the future potential market in 2025, you can see that the market has grown substantially and it will continue to. If we were to compare 2019 to 2020, we would see an even bigger growth because, of course, COVID restrictions turned many people into e-commerce because they could not purchase bricks and mortar. But now that the trend is established, it certainly looks as if it is going to remain thus. So if we look at the largest e-commerce markets in the world, the largest e-commerce market by far is China. It's the world's biggest e-commerce market. It's led by subsidiaries of the Alibaba Group like Taobao, Alibaba.com, and Tmall. Has an annual growth rate of 21%, so it's also one of the fastest growing e-commerce market. The second in the list is the United States. The United States was the biggest for a long time. It has in the last couple of years been superseded by China. In the US, we're looking at the giants like Amazon and eBay, with which we're all familiar. And of course, there are all sorts of sectors that grow really quickly in the United States. Number 3 on the list is the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom, of course, is not particularly large, but it is a really big e-commerce player. And there we are looking particularly at sales through Amazon UK, eBay UK, and ASOS. Japan is number 4. It comes in 4th, and it is the leading m-commerce market, which is very important to note if you are intending to sell via e-commerce into Japan. You are going to have to do it on mobile devices. It is the largest m-commerce market in the world. And here we look at e-commerce platforms like Rakuten, which of course is very different from Amazon or eBay, with which you might be more familiar. South Korea comes in at number 5. It's also a very large m-commerce market. And there you were looking at names like Gmarket and Coupang. And again, not the ones that we are generally familiar with. Just like to pause for a moment on India. India currently comes in at number 7 in terms of the largest e-commerce markets, but it is one of the very fastest growing. It's predicted that India will be growing by 27% in the coming years. So definitely one to put on the radar if it isn't already there for you. When we look at the size of e-commerce markets, it is also very important to look at the potential growth in those markets. And in fact, it's almost more important than the current size, because the more the market grows, the more potential there is for your goods and services. We don't need to go through these line by line, but you can see if you look at the compound annual growth rate of e-commerce in markets, you have a leading edge there for Turkey, for example, and then it tiers down. Number 4, or rather number 5, is India. Number 4 is South Africa, which is also a very interesting market for you to look at. You can see here as well that some of the more established e-commerce markets, like the United Kingdom, for example, isn't growing as quickly because the market is pretty saturated already. So just a word on return on investment and market share. It's really important to understand how much you've invested in expanding your e-commerce business and what the return on that investment is. At the most basic level, you're going to be estimating how many people want what you're selling, how many can buy it, and how many would choose you over a competitor. In terms of market share, you need to determine the competitor share in your market, and then you can either use a discounted version of that or a discounted version of your home market share. Moving on now to whether you are going to sell directly through your own website or whether you would prefer to sell indirectly. Selling directly, literally setting up an e-shop and selling through your own website. Before you make a decision to do this, you need to be able to answer these questions in the affirmative. So, is your website e-commerce enabled, and is it robust enough to cope with large volumes of traffic? Remember, I said your success could be your downfall. Well, if you have a particularly successful e-commerce shop, but your website can't cope with the traffic, your shop falls over, your customers can't fulfill their orders, trust me, they're going somewhere else. Is your website internationalized, and is it localized? Now, those two things might sound like a contradiction in terms, but the truth is the website that you use in Australia is probably not the website that you can use exactly as it is in another market, particularly if your target market is a large one and it's pretty much where you're aiming all of your efforts, and that market is not an English-speaking one. You will have to consider translating your website and certainly your e-shop. You will have to internationalize it, which means you need to make it generic, but you're also going to have to localize it, which means you need to appeal through your website directly to the consumers in the market at which you're aiming. And later on in the series, we're going to look in a lot more detail at internationalization versus localization. Does your website run properly on multiple devices? And we've already talked about Japan and Korea. It has to run on mobile devices, and that means iPads and, of course, all important mobile phones. Do you have a shopping cart set up? If you don't already have a shopping cart set up, you can't use your own website. You are going to have to sell through a third party. And do you have one-click checkout? Generally, these days, people are so familiar with buying online, they want it as quickly as possible. They don't want to have to go through multiple steps in order to buy something. And if they've purchased from you before, they want the purchase to be streamlined so that the next time they buy from you, they can click one button and it happens automatically. Do you have secure sockets layer authentication for your web and data protection? If you don't have an SSL certificate on your website, you are going to find that potential customers will not purchase from you because they won't trust you. So that is very important. And of course, do you have some sort of address and card verification system? If you don't, there's every chance that you are going to lose money because people will be transacting fraudulently with you. You need tracking numbers for orders if you're going to be selling through your own website. Do you have those? Is your staff qualified to deal with customer and technology issues? And that means customer queries that might come through in a language other than English and at all sorts of times. Day and night really is a relative concept when you are selling cross-border. Is your site securely hosted? If it's not, it's going to have to be. Do you have a disaster recovery plan? What happens if you have a flood and your office is underwater, you lose all your computer hardware? Do you have records backed up to a cloud server, for example, so that you can still maintain all those customer records? Do you have an appropriate marketing strategy in place? And that includes display advertisements, comparative shopping feeds, product ads on marketplaces, marketing through affiliate partners, etc. And of course, do you make appropriate use of search engine optimization? Now, assuming that you've not been able to answer all of those questions in the affirmative, or you've just decided that initially you would prefer to sell through a platform or a marketplace, that is selling indirectly. Selling indirectly through a third party. And again, some questions that you need to ask and answer for yourself. Before you choose a platform or a marketplace, where do your target customers shop? There's no point in you having an e-shop on Amazon if your target customers are shopping on Etsy. You really do need to understand where they go. And how do you find that out? Well, where do your competitors have their products listed? And if you are using a site where your competitors are, will your customers be enticed away from your product or your service? Does the site have a good reputation? Does it have good market penetration? Is the site positively predisposed towards Australian products? And that is very important because if they like to sell Australian products, they will do more to promote them. And when you search for similar products, how well does that site rank? Now, when we look specifically at a platform, can you set up a page for your own business within the site, or are you just listing goods in categories? Can you update your own product information online? And that is very important because if you are expecting the platform to do it for you, the costs could be really onerous and also the time limit. It takes too long sometimes for changes to be made. How well is the site marketed? And that's not just being marketed online, but also offline. Do you see advertisements on bus shelters, etc.? And how do they advertise in your target market? Does the site have pricing rules and restrictions? Again, very important. If you need to price at a certain price point, and on this particular site, they won't let you charge that because everybody else is charging less, you might find that you're going to struggle to make the right margin. What is the site's commission structure? And this is very, very important. Upfront fees might be quite low, but if they're going to hit you with a ridiculous percentage on every sale you make, you might want to reconsider. And what are the other fees? There are always fees. Sometimes they're monthly, sometimes they're per transaction. They can be upfront, they can be levied at different times, etc. Do they allow you to discount your product through other online channels? And that includes your own website. Do you have a marketing strategy to direct customers to your products on the site? And how much of that can you influence? And of course, what is the back end like? Very, very important that you have great customer service. Now, a platform is a business model that creates value by facilitating exchange between two or more independent groups. A marketplace is a type of platform business model that focuses on facilitating exchanges. So there are two types of platforms: exchange platforms, market platforms, and market platforms are exchange platforms. So a platform is what you will need to create your own fully functional online shop. And the market leaders, and it varies between these from time to time, that they switch position, but the top ones are Magento, WooCommerce, Shopify, BigCommerce, and Volusion. So who uses them? Magento, as you can see, used by some of the big guys, Coca-Cola, Ford, Christian Louboutin, etc. Woo, similarly by some big ones like Weber. And Shopify is used by a range of businesses, but also some big ones like Red Bull and Tesla. And they are used by a lot of small e-commerce businesses because they're pretty agile. When we look at marketplaces, the big three, and again, this varies from market to market, but if we generalize and we look at them in terms of capital, the biggest ones are Amazon Marketplace, also one of the most well-known marketing channels for online retailers. To work with them, you'll need to choose a plan, create a seller account, and then you upload your products. eBay. eBay, of course, one of the largest online retailers internationally with pretty much everything that you can imagine that you can buy. They offer a quick start guide to help you start selling, and it's really simple to do so. You can create a My eBay page from which to answer questions. They offer business consultation for free, and they have a business efficiency guide and seller development resources. And then there's Alibaba. Alibaba is China's e-commerce giant. If you're going to sell into China, you're going to have to sell on Alibaba. It was once a startup. Now it has huge numbers of people all over the world. To sell on Alibaba, you need to register an account, you need to establish your profile, list your products, and also understand that it can take a very long time to be established on Alibaba. If you're in the handmade goods or craft market, then Etsy is the one that you need to think about. Etsy is very easy to use. You create an account, you set your shop location and currency, set a payment method, set a building method, and you are there. Now, of course, you can't do anything in terms of actually building a business until you can get the goods into the hands of your customers. E-commerce logistics works pretty much like logistics everywhere else, but there are some things that you need to take into account. You can do all of your order fulfillment yourself in-house. That means you handle all parts of the e-commerce order fulfillment process without seeking the help of any third-party solution providers. This involves picking and packing, storing, managing inventory, shipping products to end customers, and handling returns. Now, in this case, you will probably be shipping through Australia Post, for example, or you might use a courier service like DHL or TNT, but you are going to physically deal with everything that gets the goods into the hands of that logistics provider at the freight forwarder, and they will then send the goods to you. Of course, if Australia wasn't an island, you could even drive your goods yourself across a border, but that, of course, is not really an option for us. In the case of third-party or 3PL order fulfillment, you will be outsourcing the retail order fulfillment process to a team of outside experts. And this includes receiving orders, picking and packing, inventory management, shipping and warehousing, and returns. Now, there are a number of 3PL fulfillment types. There's the full service 3PL solution, a warehouse and distribution-based 3PL, and transport-based 3PL only. And that is degrees that separate them. Full service is exactly what it says. They do everything, and it tiers down to transportation, where transportation is all they do. You deal with everything else. When you're choosing a 3PL provider, these are areas that you need to look at. Expertise, credibility. How big is their network of locations? Do they have locations in your target market, for example? How much do they charge you? What is their customer service like? Their safety record, very important. Technology, what do they use? And are their systems compatible with yours? How efficient are they? How do they deal with freight management? Do they do everything via air freight, for example, or do they have alternative methods? Just pausing now on 4PL, because 3PL is a concept that everybody is familiar with. 4PL is something which has fairly recently entered the market, and it's a step above. So 4PL is a fourth-party logistics provider. It essentially takes third-party logistics to the next level because it manages everything, including resources, technology, infrastructure, and indeed your 3PL to design, build, and provide a full end-to-end supply chain solution for businesses. This is something you would want to consider if you have a very specialized business that takes a lot of energy for you to run the business itself, but you don't need to be hands-on in terms of getting those goods into the hands of your customers. Now, once you've got the goods into the hands of your customers, of course, you really also should be paid. And in the case of e-commerce, you're probably going to be paid upfront, which is the way most e-commerce works. And that is one of the reasons why e-commerce is desirable. You're not going to be extending terms unless you sell B2B, in which case all the standard rules apply and you will probably be giving your customers terms once you have established a relationship with them. But let's assume for the moment that everything is paid for upfront, some terminology that you need to be familiar with. A payment gateway is essentially the sales terminal. It's like a cash register that is used in any bricks and mortar store. It functions to accept an online payment on your e-commerce site, and it acts like a mediator between the transaction on your website and the payment processor. The information collected by the payment gateway is transferred to the payment processor. These are the financial institutions that authorize the transaction and handle the movement of money. They verify the validity of a card, for example. They make sure that there are sufficient funds available in the account, etc. And once everything is found to be legit, they process the transfer of funds to the merchant account. The merchant account, kind of bank account where the money of a successful transaction is deposited. Now, it's different from a normal bank account because you don't have control over it. The money is deposited into your merchant account and the funds are then transferred to your official business account. You have to choose the right payment gateway. And that means just like everything else, you need to do sufficient research. Just because a payment gateway is popular in your country, in other words, here in Australia, doesn't make it the right choice for another market. So, for example, if you were doing business largely with Chinese customers, PayPal is not going to serve your needs because PayPal is very rarely used in China. You also need to make sure that the payment gateway you choose is compatible with your content management system and the platform that you have chosen to design your e-shop. So most of them, PrestaShop, Magento, etc., are usually compatible with all the important gateways, but you need to check. So these are the top 5 payment gateways in Australia at present: eWay, SecurePay, Square, WorldPay, and PIN Payments. There are websites there. Go to the sites, find out how they work, what the transaction fees are, what the delays are in getting transactions processed, etc. And that brings us to the end of today's refresher session. I'm happy to take any questions if you have them. Please feel free to type them in the chat box and I will answer them. And of course, bear in mind that today's refresher was about bringing you up to speed if you are not considered an advanced e-commerce business, because you will need to understand everything we've covered today in order for you to get the most out of the coming sessions, where we are going to be covering a lot of ground very quickly, and we are going to go into a lot more advanced detail. And just to give you a sense of the sorts of things that we're going to be covering over, if you haven't looked in any detail at this particular module, we're going to be looking in detail at selecting the right platform. We're also going to be looking at building an e-shop that actually works, e-commerce marketplaces, omni-channel retail, building a website in the year 2022, because the rules have changed substantially in the last couple of years about what makes a good website and what doesn't. And then we're also going to be looking at advanced digital marketing, automation, and AI. We're going to be doing a bit of future gazing, which is always the fun stuff. And finally, we're going to be looking at data and how you use that to best effect. Thank you, Paul. You're most welcome. And yes, Bimal, there will be a recording of this session, which will be made available through Global Victoria on their website. but it's probably not going to be made available immediately. They generally make the website recordings available at the end of the program, but we can certainly keep you posted on how that is going to work this time round. I am happy, though, if you want to drop me an email to send you a copy of the slides, if that will make you happy. And yes, Pete, I think that obviously answers your question as well. So yes, I'm happy to send you the slides if you send me an email. And you would have seen my email at the start of this, but if it wasn't that clear, Collins Rex, written as one word, COLLINSREX @gtpalliance.com. And I will be able to share all of those slides with you. Look, another question. Thank you very much, Angeline. That's very kind of you. Just bring your attention to the address on the screen if you want to register for any of the other sessions or indeed any of the other modules. This is where you go to do it. Very important that you register as early as possible, because the earlier you are able to register, the more information we might be able to share with you in advance. And if you haven't looked at the other sessions, I'll just give you a sense of what we have coming up. There's a marketing masterclass, which is equally applicable to e-commerce and to any other form of export. We're also going to be looking at standards and certification, which again, very important, depending particularly on the sectors in which you operate. For all businesses, cybersecurity readiness. Vitally important that your cybersecurity is up to scratch if you are going to be selling online. If you're transacting online, you're doing anything that involves you and your customers, boy, you've got to know about cybersecurity. You already know what we're doing in advanced e-commerce, and there's also going to be a module on advanced business rules, where we're going to be looking at 3 specific markets and what it means to engage with those markets. It doesn't look as if there are any other questions. If you do think of any other, there we go. Just as I said that, there's one that's just popped up. You've asked, Michelle, can we have some specific case to facilitate the topic that you mentioned? You're going to have to give me a little bit more information about the topics that you specifically would like more information on, because obviously I can't revisit the entire webinar. So maybe drop me an email if there's a specific question that you have, and I'll help you to answer that. Bimal, do you have to attend the face-to-face session on the 5th of May? If you want the information in that session, you will have to be in that session, because that session is not going to be repeated as a webinar. That session is specifically a face-to-face session. And for those of you who are wondering about that session, on the 5th of May, it's building an e-shop that rocks. So that one is only going to be done face-to-face, but I'm sure I will be able to give you some additional information which we could make available as resources offline if you weren't able to attend that session. Any other questions about today's or the program to come? Anything that we might be able to shed some more light on, please type it into the chat now. Just in terms of the face-to-face session, in that session, we are going to look at how you build an e-shop. So if you've already got one, you want to come along to that to find out how you can make it better. If you haven't yet built one, it's going to give you a lot of gritty information about how you go about it and how you actually build an e-shop. Then there's a later session, which is online, which is all about your website, which of course goes beyond your e-shop. And there you will also have the opportunity, if you want to have your specific website critiqued. So, you know, you can get some hints and tips as to how you can improve your website. So bear that one in mind as well. It doesn't look as if we do have any questions at this stage. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so that I can see you all a little bit better and you can see me a little bit better. Thank you everyone for attending today's session. It's been great having the pleasure of your company. I look forward to seeing you not just at the future webinars, but also at the face-to-face session, where of course there's also the opportunity to interact a little bit more with each other. So that would be really great. Yes, in the chat box, Bimal, that is my email. Nope, you've got a misprint there. So my email address, and I'll just type it here for you as well. So you've all got it. So that's my email address, everyone. Feel free to drop me an email and I'll send you the slides. collinsrex@gtpalliance.com. So thank you, everyone. Thanks very much for attending today's session. Look forward to seeing you at the next one and hopefully at all of the ones to come. Have a good afternoon and go forth and do great business. Goodbye.